I Am Legend. It's about a dude who will be legend.
All right, I want to start this off by saying that I respect Will Smith as an actor. Just because I don't like certain movies that he's in doesn't mean I don't like him.
Mhm.
But as you can see, there's a bunch of zombies behind me because of I Am Legend. But I Am Legend isn't about zombies, is it? It's
Nope.
about vampires.
Ah! You want some salami?
Sure. All right. So there's a lot that I have to say about this, mostly in comparison.
They're basically, they have this disease, and for some reason, I don't remember if he finds out or not why, but they emulate the properties of vampires for some reason.
There are certain things that he does find out. He doesn't find out everything, but he theorizes that vampires aren't actually real, that all the stories of vampires and all like the medieval things and all this shit, they were real, but they were all caused by this bacteria, this disease, and that's where vampires came from originally. So even though they're not like traditional vampires, in our world today, they would still be the vampires.
Yeah. They're not vampires in the sense that, like, Dracula is a vampire. But they're, like, the realistic thing that the myth of vampires were based on.
Yeah. So, yeah, like I said before, this is most likely going to be a comparison between the book and the movies, which I've only ever seen the movie with Will Smith. I know there's more than one movie in it out there, but the biggest thing that I've already mentioned is that Will Smith fights a bunch of zombies that for some reason can't go out in the sun. That's never explained why.
Yeah.
And the book is about vampires, and two different sets of vampires at that: living vampires and dead vampires.
Yep.
Living vampires are people who have been affected with the virus but haven't died. Dead vampires are people who have died with the virus in their system and have come back to life.
Pretty much, yeah.
So there's a clarification for anyone watching this video.
No. Good girl. Yeah, basically that's the environment for like the story. But I always saw I Am Legend as maybe being a story about, like, maybe not commentary, but it's a story about, like, isolation and its effect. Isolation and its effect on a person. Like, how do you deal with being totally alone? And it turns out you kind of go crazy.
Oh, yeah. He is absolutely crazy. Like, no doubt in my mind. He argues with himself constantly in the book, tells himself to shut up, like, yells at himself and all this shit. And there's parts of his brain that points things out that he just doesn't, he doesn't realize that he's saying out loud. It is hilarious.
Yeah. And basically the way he deals with the isolation is interesting. So he, like, comes to adopt this, like, monk-like philosophy where he, like, tries to... There's basically how he deals with isolation, which is he basically adopts this, like, monk-like philosophy where he tries to distance himself from, like, worldly, like, pleasures and things like that, because he knows that if he's going to go crazy if he, like, fixates on it. Leela, no. So
yeah.
he talks about that a little bit. I don't remember exactly what it is, but he basically, like, he adopts, like, being celibate and all this kind of stuff. So, like he, like, eventually he's like, oh, this is driving me crazy. I have to change my viewpoint on things, otherwise I won't survive.
Well, I think it does drive him crazy, to be honest. But after a certain point, he describes it as, like, once the option has been taken away from you, it's easier to stop thinking about it. So, like, he can't just go out and have sex with the vampires. So
he could just
like,
choose.
He becomes celibate by choice. Yeah,
that's
why he stops looking up people. All the lady vampires, like, keep showing their naughty bits to him, trying to get him to come out and have sex with them,
That's
which I
one of
thought was pretty weird.
I really love that part early on in the book because it's so vivid, and also about the character of the vampires or whatever. So they're not like zombies that are just brainless; like they can still talk and think and stuff. And so basically, he's hiding out.
Oh,
in his
yeah.
house. He has his house is basically like a fortress, and then but he has this like peephole where he can go and look, but he can't look out it because they found out that he has a peephole, and then they try to basically entice him into coming out by like doing lewd things in front of the people. And so like he's like, I can't keep looking out. And I think there's even a great part where he's like, I can't take it. Why am I the only one that's left alive? I'm just gonna go be one of them. And he's like starts taking all the locks off his door. Am I remembering that right?
Oh yeah, he does it. I think he does it twice. And the first time he does it, he like unlocks it and he moves the bar and he's getting ready to open the door, but he hears them start screaming and howling and stuff outside. He's like, "What am I doing?" And then the second time he does it, he's like, screw this. And he grabs 2 pistols and he like unlocks the door, flings it open, and just starts shooting into the crowd. And then like he sees them get up and he realizes, wait a minute, I can't kill them like this. And they attack him, so he just beats them with the butt of the gun until he gets back in the house. Yeah, and I'm like, that's exactly what a crazy person would do in that situation.
I'm thinking of the first time, like basically the loneliness finally breaks him, and he's like, you know what, I'm just gonna go do it. I'm just gonna go be one of them. And then by the time he's almost out there, he's like, what am I doing? No.
Yeah. The only part that I hate is, okay, so they have Ben Cortman, who is like the leader of the dead vampires, and he's supposed to be like Neville's arch nemesis. Like, other than the time where he doesn't make it home in time, he's only got like 2 lines.
Yes. Come out, Neville.
And he just repeats them over and over. Come out, Neville. Come out. Like, how many times? Like, does he actually just sit there night after night after night just screaming, come out, Neville, come out, over and over and over until morning? That would be enough to drive me insane.
Does he soundproof his house at all? I can't remember if he does or not.
Yeah, it's not soundproofed in the beginning. And I think we go like 2 or 3 weeks without it being soundproof. Because once he finally like goes out and tries to kill them, he's like, okay, I have to soundproof my house. Otherwise, I'm going to be driven mad and I'm going to end up killing myself. And then he still waits 3 days to soundproof his house. So, I mean, he eventually does it, but it takes him forever to do it.
And he somehow sneaks a bunch of books back to his house. I guess he's got the time. Like he goes to the library and raids it.
Yeah, like during the day, he just goes to the library.
I'm not sure why libraries have microscopes.
I don't know. This is like, what year does it take place in? Like the 80s or something?
I think it's like the 70s. Like the early 70s.
Yeah. I've never been to a library in the 70s, so maybe they did have microscopes back then.
I don't know.
But that's another thing that I like more about the book than about the movie. I know we've talked about this before, but the fact that in the movie he's like some scientist, government scientist that stays behind to try and find a cure. In the book, he's just some random dude who just happens to survive because he was bitten by a vampire bat like 3 years earlier.
Oh, I forgot about that. That was stupid.
Yeah, it's the dumbest explanation I've ever heard in a book. Like, oh, why do you think you survived this long? I don't know. Why did any of this happen? Probably because I was bitten by a vampire bat in Africa. And I'm like, what? Like, that's,
usually okay. Like Panama or
anyway.
Got bit by a bat, and somehow that makes him be immune to vampirism.
Yeah. So, anyway, yeah, he's just a regular dude who, like, after 3 years of isolation is finally like, you know what? I'm going to try and figure out what causes this. And he goes to the library day after day, just stealing books to read them and figure out how, like, how to cure this or figure out what's causing it. And he can't do it. Like, he never figures out a cure or anything like that because he's just a regular dude. He's not a scientist. Like, you can't read a book on biology and be like, I know how to cure diseases now. And I really like that about the book because they didn't fantasize it like, oh, this random dude has found the cure by mixing cornmeal and syrup together or some shit in his basement.
I think one of the most brilliant scenes in the book is after he meets Ruth and she's at his house and he's basically like he has all these conflicting emotions about seeing another human for the first time, but he's also really suspicious. And so he keeps like doing things to prove that she's a vampire, and she always has like some like logical excuse about why it doesn't actually prove that she's a vampire. And at first you're like, okay, well, she's clearly a vampire. But then the more she explains, the more you're like, oh, well, I guess that makes sense. You know, he's just really suspicious and like paranoid. That's what's going on. And then like you're like, no, maybe she is a vampire. You're not really sure until she finally just like beats him over the head and runs away.
Yeah, it's like I imagine it like a cartoon, like an old like 90s cartoon where it's like, I'm not a vampire, spends all of this time convincing him that she's a human, and then she goes, haha, I was a vampire, hits him over the head with a wooden mallet and runs.
I like when he makes her the eggs and he like slips garlic in it and shoves it in her face, and he's like, aha, you must be one of them, this made you sick. And she's like, you just shoved garlic in my face. Of course it made me sick. I'm mourning for my dead husband. I'm already traumatic. Or like which is a great twist.
Even like when that first happened, when he first did that, I kind of believed her because I was like, okay, in the very beginning of the book, talking garlic in his house is so strong that it used to make him nauseous and want to throw up. And I was like, okay, so if you weren't used to it yet, then that would be your normal reaction. But we were lied to.
I like it's actually kind of a cool twist that this lady like hates him because he killed her husband, but he didn't know that they were as advanced as they really are or whatever. And so at first she hates him because he killed her husband during one of his like day raids or whatever. But then she actually meets him and he's like, oh, he's just a normal dude. Like, I don't actually hate him now and all this kind of stuff. So then she tries to save him from the death squads and stuff.
Yeah, because like even in the book, he didn't think like the living vampires, when he was describing them, like they were catatonic. They were in comas and stuff, and they wouldn't wake up until they died. And so he was killing them before they could die and come back, and that made sense to me. But then they're like, oh, we actually do live. We do come alive. We're not catatonic. We just haven't been attacking you. And I'm like, okay, so you've gone 3 years of this dude killing your people, and the only time you finally decide to, like, come forward and tell him, hey, we're not actually bad people, is after he's killed hundreds of your people and he's wanted for murder. Like, after the first time he killed someone in your society, you should have been like, okay, now we need to go talk to him.
I think we're supposed to believe that at first they're not very advanced, but then over like the duration of the 30 years, they become more and more intelligent. So then by the end, they're like real people, just vampires. But at first, they weren't that intelligent.
Yeah.
Which seems pretty dubious to me, like advancing that quickly.
Yeah. I had a theory with it that, like, okay, so every other day, he would wake up and he would find one of the vampires dead on his lawn because the dead vampires were turning on their own. What if those weren't actually vampires? Like, what if the people, like the bodies that he found, were actually the living vampires, because the living vampires have been sending like messengers to his house every night trying to get him to stop killing them, but then the dead vampires kill all of the living vampires because they've still got fresh blood in them. And like the living vampires are like, he keeps killing our emissaries, we have to hunt him down, but it's not actually him.
Yeah, that would make sense to me.
Because that was one thing I didn't understand, is the dead vampires turning on each other, because the dead vampires don't have blood in their system, and the virus has to survive off of fresh blood.
Yeah.
So they would literally just be killing their own people for fun at that point, like not nutrients. But if they were killing living vampires, then it would make sense.
I think not the ending, but a little bit before the ending is interesting. So like he finds out that they're sentient and they have this new society that they're building and all this kind of stuff, and he's like, "All right, I'll submit myself to their judgment. You know, I deserve it." He finally just sort of like is like, whatever. He just like agrees to it. And so he's waiting to be arrested, but then the death squad shows up and kills all those like dead vampires or whatever. And he's like, "Oh, they're butchers. They're not here to arrest me. They're here to kill me." And so ironically, he gets his gun to like defend himself in a panic, and that it makes them go, "Oh, look, he's hostile. He wasn't actually going to give himself up." And so then they have to use like brutal, like excessive force to like bring him in. So he sort of screws himself. Like he's like, "All right, I'm just gonna let them arrest me."
Yeah.
But then he's like, "Oh, I can't. They're not gonna arrest me. They're gonna kill me." And then by doing that, then they're like, "Oh, we better bring him in."
Yeah, and the entire time he's sitting there explaining it to himself why they're doing this. He's like, "Oh, once they call my name, I'm gonna go out and surrender." And then they start chopping down his door with an axe, and he's like, "They didn't call my name. Why aren't they calling my name?" And then he runs up to his bedroom with the gun, and he's like, all of the lights are off in my house. Maybe they think that I'm already gone, so they're just breaking in to make sure." And then he's still freaking out in the corner, even though he just explained it to himself. And then they open the door, and he fires wildly into them. He's like, "Why am I doing this? Why don't I just surrender? I said I was going to do it." But he's still attacking them, and then he hits one of them, so they beat him half to death with a club. Oh, my God. Yeah. So he definitely screws himself in the end there.
Yeah. But yeah, it's... you finally figure out in the last 2 pages why the title is named what the title is. Where he's like, "Oh, I'm the boogeyman of this new society." Like, basically, they flip it. At the beginning, they were the boogeymen, and then by the end, it turns out he was the boogeyman the whole time. And what he thought was, like, self-defense was actually, like, to them, this, like, horrific serial killer.
Yeah, I love the way that he explains it. Like, he explains it by saying, like, "Oh, back in my time, vampires were a myth. They were a legend. But in this time, I'm the minority because vampires rule the population. I am legend." Like, that is amazing.
And then he slowly dies.
Ending to each book.
Then he slowly dies from whatever the pill was. She's like, "Here, in case you want to kill yourself."
I don't actually know. Well, she said so that it would be less painful. Yeah. So I thought, like, okay, that means, like, give him some, like, morphine or something so that he overdoses instead of them, like, chopping him to bits with an axe. But then I was thinking, like, I wonder, it would be fucking hilarious if, like, because the book ends after he says, "I am legend." You don't actually know how he dies. Yeah. Like, what if he took those pills and they were just, like, Tylenol? Like, to take the edge off when they beat him to death?
He's like, "I feel better now. Maybe I can escape." I assumed it was like so he could kill himself instead of letting them kill him, and then like him mysteriously dying in prison before like having judgment rendered would just like increase the mystique of his legend.
It would basically solidify his place in legend if they finally captured him, and then he died before they could kill him.
And so like like they didn't actually kill him, like he was too far above their comprehension or whatever. Like they didn't actually defeat him. Yeah. He would just shoot away on his own. Which is a good way for the legend of him, the legend of Neville, to end. I thought of Harry Potter before because his name is Neville. Neville's not a cool name.
Oh, every time they said it, they're like, "Come out, Neville," and I'm like, "Yeah, Neville, you fucking potato."
I really like the guy.
I don't actually know if you get that reference, but
I don't think so. It sounds like an insult, though.
Okay, so there's, have you ever seen Harry Potter Puppet Pals?
No.
Oh my god, they're really old videos, but they're hilarious. Like, they're all puppets, but Neville is just a potato with a face drawn on it. And Yeah, so that's that reference, but that's what I thought every time they said his name.
Oh, crap. I forgot what
One thing that I hate about the book and the movie, actually, it's not just this book and it's not just this movie, it's every movie, every book that does this, is the dog. So in the movie, it's like his best friend. He's had the dog since he was a puppy, and then the dog gets attacked by the zombies. Dog gets infected, and then he chokes out the dog and kills it, which is super fucking brutal. Like, just let the dog die.
Yeah.
But in the book, it's just a random stray dog that he finds, and it's already infected, and he brings it in to try and save its life. Spends weeks trying to get its trust so that he can bring it into the house. Finally brings it into the house, and it dies 2 days
What I
later.
thought was interesting. Like, in the movie, they're like best buds and everything. But in the book, like, he and the dog barely spend any time together. Like, most of the time, it's just him desperately trying to get the dog to trust him more. And, like, he barely even spends any time with the dog, and then it dies anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I hate books and I hate movies that have to kill off the dog. Like, it's so unnecessary. Like, if he would have just, like, if the dog would have lived, he could have let the dog loose. Because the dog already knew how to survive on its own, clearly. It's been surviving 3 years by itself. So once he knew the death squads were coming, let the dog loose into the world, the dog survives and he still dies. But no, they always have to kill off the dog, and I don't understand why, and it's such bullshit.
I know why.
It's like, oh, we want to show how bad this thing is, so we have to kill off everyone's favorite animal.
Basically, everyone gets attached to the dog because dogs are awesome. And then they're like, oh, this will be a real emotional impact in the story if the dog dies. That'll be a big deal for the reader. And that's why they always do it.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I
kind of understand that, but I don't get emotionally attached to the dogs. Like, I enjoy the fact that the dog shows up. I'm like, okay, it's a personal growth for the main character and all this stuff, and then the dog dies for no reason. And it's not like I'm emotionally scarred because I love the dog so much. I'm just like, why did you have to kill him off? He's a dog. Just leave him alone.
I was going to say, I like the dude who does the voice for the audiobook. I don't know if you read the one I gave you or if you found a different one. Was yours from Audible or was it the one I sent you?
It was from Audible. It was free on Audible.
Okay. That might be different from the...
It's easier for me to hook up my phone than it is for the laptop. So if I can find the same book on Audible for free, that's usually the one I go with.
Okay. It may not be the same dude, but the dude from the one I read was really good. Because I listened to that in audiobook too.
Yeah. I would have to assume it was the same guy because there was only one option on Audible, and usually if more than one person narrates it, there's more than one option. The guy that I was listening to was phenomenal. An excellent performance on the book.
Yeah. I don't think what else there was. Been a few years since I read it, so I don't remember everything.
I think if there's anything significant that we have not spoken about yet. The explanation between the cross and them turning into animals and shit is all psychological because the bacteria basically makes them mentally retarded. And it like, oh, the cross doesn't actually offend them because like if you were a Jew and you died and became a vampire, why would you be offended by the cross? So he ends up capturing Ben Cortman at one point before he became his nemesis or whatever.
And he pulls out
shows him the cross and nothing happens. And he's like, haha, you think I'm afraid of the cross? And then he brings out the Torah and he like shrivels in front of it. Yeah. And I'm like, that's absolutely hilarious.
And
I explain like he's seen vampires climb to roofs and jump off and flap their arms just to hit the ground and die because they thought they were bats. Like, that is hilarious.
I was pretty dubious, even though that's one of my favorite scenes. I'm like, you just have a Torah on hand? Like, somehow I don't believe that.
That's a fair point. I didn't think about that.
Like he's like, aha.
Maybe he got it
He's
from
like, oh, that doesn't work on me. Haha. Lick my vampire balls. And then he's like, Torah. And he's like, no. Which means he was sitting there with like a bunch of religious symbols on a table just to see which ones worked.
Yeah. Yeah. Just like how the library had like microscopes and a bunch of shit that he took. The library also has just a section of religious objects. So they explain everything fairly well about how the vampirism disease works scientifically. I kind of, I mean, I'm not a scientist, and I know that Robert Neville is also not a scientist, but he seemed to make more sense of these things than I did. Like when they were talking about how the spikes don't have to be penetrated in the heart because the slashes cause oxygen to reach the bacteria, then the bacteria self-destructs because of oxygenation. I didn't understand exactly how that worked because I'm pretty sure that's not how regular bacteria works, but it made sense while I was reading it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all of their explanations worked well enough for me to be like, okay, that's probably how it works.
It's not like
But
the science.
I have no scientific background that actually
the
tell
premise
you
isn't even
if
realistic.
that's how it would work.
Yeah, it's not like the science even matters since the
Yeah.
premise isn't even a real thing. Like, there's no real vampirism.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I did kind of like how he explained the garlic thing, though. The aroma of the garlic causes anaphylactic shock, and that's why they stay away from it and puke and all this stuff when they get near it. That one made sense to me.
Oh, that was another
I know.
thing that I was like, oh, really? That's convenient. Is that he somehow has like an endless supply of garlic that he's constantly refreshing to put around his house. I'm like,
yeah.
I don't know how fast
I don't
garlic.
know how fast garlic
grows, but somehow I don't think it's fast.
But after 3 years, I feel like you should have run out by now.
Or they should have gone immune to it.
Unless he has to have like a massive greenhouse. Just like wall to wall to wall, nothing but garlic.
Where do you get the
garlic? That would be awful. Yeah.
You could have made
it.
All right,
so overall, if we're talking between the book and the movie, I think we have no debate. The book is better than the movie. Way better. I think most books are better than movies.
Yeah.
I would give the book an 8 out of 10. Excellent story. Excellent portrayal of inner insanity and scientifically explained vampires. So
I'd put it around a 7. It was pretty high up for me. I liked it quite a bit.
All right.